So without any further ado, let me call on Professor Ian Young, who's the Vice-Chancellor of the Australian National University. So his connection with the conference is that not only is he supportive of interdisciplinary work, as all our speakers are, but I've been at the ANU since 1979, so the bulk of the work that I've done, which has been the driving force for this conference, I guess, has happened at this university, and I've been very grateful to the university for its support. Ian.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Gabriel. And as Gabriel said, one of the really important things that we do at ANU, and I think more and more gatherings around Australia, is to acknowledge the first Australians. So let me do that with a very simple statement. We acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet, and we pay our respects to the elders of the Ngunnawal people, past and present. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this, the first global conference on research integration and implementation. I'm delighted that ANU could host this very important conference. But it has attracted so many to both ANU and indeed around the world as testament to the importance and value to the international research community. For those of you visiting Australia and indeed to ANU for the first time, welcome. Welcome also to the many delegates joining us online and at conferences in Germany, the Netherlands and Uruguay. I think that comes with certainly a few logistics problems and certainly some time zone problems. So if you're sitting up in the middle of the night at the present time, thank you for doing exactly that. A lot of what universities do is linked to our responsibility to help society understand and deal with complex real-world problems. These problems do not isolate themselves conveniently into disciplines. Floods are not just a problem for engineers, but also for health workers, psychologists, sociologists, and environmental scientists. And I could choose many, many similar problems. I think we all understand that just too well. Problems like this form the stimulus for the research that will be discussed over the next 3 days. Issues including building a sustainable future, combating organised crime, and improving the health of marginalised populations, to name just a few of the really big issues. What's unique here is that the focus of the conference is not on the problems themselves. Rather, it's on finding better ways of dealing with these types of complex issues. More specifically, the focus is on developing methodologies that allow different kinds of research to be integrated and also for research findings to be effectively communicated. This conference recognises that there is already a lot of hard work that has been done to build, and we want to build on that and bring together in a number of diverse ways, to bring together diverse research communities to collaborate and to share their work. I understand this is the first time that all of these overlapping groups are in the same real-life and indeed virtual room. Research on implementation and integration of sciences conducted by Professor Bama, which was the trigger for this conference, aims to develop a solid methodological base that draws together this vast array of theory, techniques and processes. So before I hand back to Gabriel, I'd like to thank in particular the ARC Centre of Excellence in Policing and Security, of which the ANU is a proud member, as the main sponsor of this conference, and indeed that's extremely important in bringing together all of these groups. The work you're doing is vital to the future of research and to society, and I hope your discussions here at ANU are thought-provoking and fruitful, and that the relationships you build will serve you well in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Ian. So our second introductory speaker is Professor Simon Bronitt, who's the Director of the ARC Centre of Excellence in Policing and Security. I've been delighted to be part of that Centre of Excellence, even though I head up a Centre of Research School in Population Health. I think it's really important to bridge those kinds of boundaries. And the Centre of Excellence has been really important in fostering this work. And Simon, I'm delighted that you can also be here to make some opening remarks.
Thank you, Gabrielle. My name is Simon Bronitt, and I'm the director of the ARC Centre of Excellence in Policing and Security, based at Griffith University, but spread across a number of universities, including ANU, University of Queensland, and Charles Sturt University. And we're delighted that we host Gabrielle's really innovative program of research around integration and implementation at the heart of our work program. I'd like to echo the VC's welcome, especially to our online and international visitors. You've travelled a long way, perhaps not the ones that are logging in online, but certainly we feel we hope to make you very welcome here to this event. Like Gabrielle, I am committed to building a more rigorous base into research methodologies to promote genuine interdisciplinarity. Now, I've been an academic for 22 years, 19 years of which I spent here at ANU, and I was certainly, when I entered academia, I was not equipped to do interdisciplinarity. I was trained as a lawyer, and in fact I do credit my first project on my first sabbatical in 1995, working with Gabrielle Bammer and the Institute of Criminology as opening my eyes to other disciplines. That was the famous heroin trial that unfortunately never came to pass, but the feasibility research there was very much a prototype of what we try to do today in terms of implementation, integration and implementation. So I think I'm committed to the two ideas, really forging new methodologies for interdisciplinarity and impact. Now, impact's used a lot, and I think it's used in a range of different ways. But what I'm talking about, as the Vice-Chancellor indicated, is real impact on tackling and providing solutions to complex real-world problems. The rhetoric of evidence-based policy and the reality sometimes do not match. And I think our challenge is to work out why. And certainly the ANU node of CEPS has been at the forefront of that commitment to trying to develop those solutions, to overcome disciplinary silos and to enhance industry engagement. I was particularly delighted myself to reflect on the challenges of leading an interdisciplinary centre with heavy industry engagement, and if you look at some of the poster sessions you can see some of the challenges and success stories we've had with industry. So I was delighted to participate in that project and the book, which I commend to you, ANU ePress, Disciplining Interdisciplinarity. And I think it's a very important challenge to really deepen our knowledge from a range of different perspectives on this key question. There is a huge novelty in this event, not only because it's a first international conference on this topic, and also because of the online engagement, which, as we know, we're going to have challenges, and I'm, with Alison Ritter, going to be experimenting on how this will work. But also yesterday, if you were there at the welcome reception and the wonderful icebreaker, as you can see on my conference registration tag, you see little dots, and we've created lots of little dots through that icebreaker, trying to identify areas of convergence and connection. Of course, this was a covert agenda by Gabrielle to get us more engaged across disciplines, to stop talking with the people we normally talk with, and break out of our, if you like, our disciplinary straitjackets. I think it's going to be a challenging exercise in decoding what these dots mean, but I think that's part of the exercise. So this event may well be an important one. It may in fact be a disciplinary turning point. I mean, I know there's an agenda to be discussed about whether we need a new discipline, and I think it'll be probably for historians another vital discipline, in my view, to understanding the complex real-world challenges. It'll be for historians to determine precisely how successful we were in that exercise. But I'm delighted that CEPS can support this, and I'm also grateful to the ARC and to Aidan for the support that they've given to CEPS to enable us to continue supporting projects like this. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Simon. And last but not least, we have Professor Aidan Byrne, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Research Council, which is the funding body not only for the Centre of Excellence, but for a whole lot of important work that's done in the interdisciplinary space. And I thought it would be very appropriate, Aidan, for you to also say a few words as a key supporter of the kind of work that we do. Thanks, Aidan.
Thanks, Gabrielle, and thanks, Simon, for that. It's a real pleasure to come here and talk at the opening of your conference because, as you know, interdisciplinary research is something that's always been very special for me and particularly so in my current role. It's also a pleasure to be back here at the Australian National University because, again, I think Canberra has been one of these places where people can come together and meet and talk about issues across the discipline boundaries. And I would like to, too, express a very warm welcome to people in other countries. I've just pulled out my own phone and figured out the time zone. So if you are in Europe at the moment, it's past midnight. I admire your stamina. Uruguay's not too bad, but heading into the evening. I should point out for those that are overseas, we had an interesting weekend. The game's not over by any means, but we had an election in this country. This, of course, means that I'm still in caretaker mode, so by all rights I should stop talking now because I do want to talk about policy and policy of government, and one isn't supposed to do that in caretaker mode. But I will talk about some things because I think the sort of research that is being discussed here is something that we do have to think about as a nation. So the research community, in my view, and maybe the lessons of the election campaign should be something that the research community takes note of. The research community can take nothing for granted. Right? It's easy to think that ideas, insights and technologies, those things that come out of academic research, will just be brilliant enough to stand on their own, and not only within the field but outside of it. And academics very often fall into the trap of assuming that everyone sees the world the way they do. And the reality is that that's not true. You know, the reality is there's a lot more work that needs to be done, and I think this conference is part of that, to make sure that the fruits of academic endeavours do get distributed and distributed broadly. And that matters to everyone. It matters to the researchers sitting in the office next door. It matters to institutions and like-minded organisations around the world, but it also matters to the community at large. And one of the things that I think academics have to do, and have to do more carefully into the future, is to think about how the work, how their research migrates and translates into the world at large. Now, the ARC, the Australian Research Council, supports a lot of research in key discipline areas. Some think those discipline areas shouldn't be pursued, but one of the things that I've really taken on board in the year or so that I've been head of the Australian Research Council is the importance of all research that we support. One of the things I've appreciated, my background, for those that don't know, is in the physical sciences. But what one quickly learns to realise is the interconnectedness of all of the research activity is crucially important for progressing things forward. Now, the ARC, as I say, has different programs trying to support the best research in discipline areas, but it also has a number of activities which are specifically designed to bring together and integrate, and we've heard some of those today. Simon's Centre of Excellence is one. The other Centre of Excellence in Population Health and Ageing, and I went to an opening of the ANU Centre for Research in Ageing and Wellbeing a few weeks ago. Those centres, when you go to their presentations like this one, are specifically about the conversations that in my mind have to happen across those discipline boundaries. And I think our centres of excellence are a particularly good investment for promoting that. They're very effective at providing critical mass to bring together researchers. They're very natural meeting places for research, and again this conference is evidence of that. And they become home to future research leaders. And I think that's a crucially important part of nurturing the stars of the future. Because one of the things that happens in these centres of excellence is that people focus on a problem. And of course that problem, naturally, in my view, tends to span different discipline areas. And without the seeding that you get from this sort of enterprise, we will continually get locked into our discipline boundaries. And the challenge that centres of excellence, the challenge that meetings like this one has, is to transcend those. And of course the reason for doing that is that the exciting new activities sits, as the old line goes, at the boundaries, at the interfaces of those traditional ones. And it can get really exciting if some of the time new disciplines emerge. And unless you actually specifically foster and nurture, unless you specifically invest in that sort of activity, it won't, in general, happen spontaneously. It requires effort, it requires dedication, it requires pushing all the time. And then, of course, some of the time, you know, they will bear fruit. And then that's exciting because bridges are built, new discipline areas emerge and develop, and problems, real problems that we face in the world today, can get properly addressed. Now, of course, funders like the Australian Research Council, and indeed other funders around the world, very often don't help the process. Very often funders want pigeonholing in particular discipline areas, and it becomes difficult when you're doing research across those boundaries to get it recognised. Our peer process at the ARC is something I treat in the highest regard, and indeed research agencies around the world treat their peer review process of applications that come into them very, very seriously. But of course the peer review process itself is not always the best instrument to look at interdisciplinary research. And it's been one of these very vexing questions that I've looked at over this last year. How do we do it better within our agency? And I've toyed very strongly with the notion of creating a separate panel of looking at interdisciplinary research. Now, of course, when I had conversations with some of my colleagues overseas, they said, yeah, we tried that before, and it didn't work. And I'm not quite sure why it didn't work, but there is a comfort that researchers have bedding back down into their discipline bases. And they don't have comfort, they don't have reassurance to step outside of those particular zones. A challenge I have as somebody leading a research agency is to give those people more comfort. So I didn't in this year's round create a new panel, but one of the things I did do in the review process is to make sure that where we identified grants that did transcend those research boundaries, we did our best to get cross-readings across our different panels. Now, I don't know whether that's helped. We don't have the outcomes yet of that process, but I hope it will. I hope it will help to have an understanding of what happens. Of course, as a person also oversighting a review process of research, we occasionally don't help either, because our ERA process, our evaluation process, also tries to pigeonhole research into particular discipline boundaries. So what I put to you, for those researchers working in that area, that when we run the next evaluation process, use the option of coding your work across those discipline boundaries, because one of the most interesting pieces of information out of the last era is an interdisciplinary matrix that we have, where we can recognise where the connections are occurring in those discipline areas. And I think that provides a very, very rich piece of information for the sector to use. Now, of course, you know, Simon mentioned the words impact. The aim of this whole exercise here is not just to have a conversation that makes us all feel good, is to actually to achieve meaningful outcomes. The point of bringing everyone together is to get outcomes you would not get otherwise. And again, this is another issue that funding agencies like myself all around the world are looking at very closely. How best do we measure and evaluate the outcomes, not just the outputs, but the outcomes from the research environment? Now, of course, we have our own evaluation exercise, And I'm wanting to defend that as perhaps one of the world's best measures of academic excellence. But it's not the only thing that comes out of sectors. It's not the only thing that comes out of centres of excellence, as we've heard of. So we've got to be a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more understanding of what really are the true outputs and the true contributions of the research sector. Now, of course, other countries are doing things differently. In the UK, they're looking at case studies as a measure of impact, and we should be watching that with interest as that process unfolds over the next year or so. Because we're moving into a new phase, because we've just acquired a new government in this country, I don't know which way things will go in the next few years. But one of the things I'll be working to do in my role as head of the Australian Research Council is to make sure that we do leave open the door for understanding the contribution that diverse research perspectives brings to particular problems. Because it is very, very firmly my view that unless you actually are able to not only drill down deeply, but to take the outputs from research in particular areas and integrate it together, you're almost wasting your time. And because of that, I think it's meetings like this one become very, very important as the testing ground for making sure that this can happen in the most effective way possible. And I think, you know, I want to commend to you, Gabrielle, and to you as this meeting, take advantage of this. I think it's very exciting. I've already been online and looked at some of the online posters. The notion that you put material out there and get responses and see how it integrates together. The core of this meeting, I think, is going to be really at the core of how we best deliver on the objective, which is to stimulate a research sector, but to stimulate it to provide benefits into the community at large. So thank you very much for the opportunity of talking here, and I wish you well in your meeting. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Aidan. That was terrific. And you'll see that this is not only, as Aidan's alluded, this is not only an issue in Australia and for Australian research funders, but it's also an issue, obviously, in all the countries that are participating in this. And it's terrific to see the kind of way that Aidan's exercising his mind about how to make this happen. And it's also great to see how that's going to happening on an international scale. I think we're blessed to have some very thoughtful people heading up our research organisations, trying to make the kind of change that we are trying to make happen on the research ground happen in the funding world. We've got just one of the things we have to do with this conference, because we're also online, is to try and keep to time. And we've got just a few minutes before the first plenary session. We're not going to have time for questions. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping instead. So let me just say a few things about the workshops. There's been a lot of interest in the workshops, so we're actually going to run the workshops in this room. They'll be open to everybody. We didn't feel like we could restrict the numbers. And for those of you who are watching online, we're also going to be streaming them online. If you look at the media site, you'll find an attachments button where you can find the handouts for the workshops will be posted there. And the second plenary speaker, Julie Thompson-Klein, also has an attachment that is available there. So before her plenary, please find it. That'll be great. For those of you who don't want to come to the workshops, there will be networking lunches, and you can sign up outside to find other people to go off and have lunch with. As part of keeping the costs manageable, we've decided not to provide lunch, but to encourage you to go out and enjoy some of the beautiful spring weather. There are a whole range of eating places close by that cater for all sorts of tastes, and we hope that you'll do that. And if you're going to a workshop, you've got 45 minutes to get lunch before you head off to the workshop. We're trying to be as paper-free as possible, so we're encouraging you to watch the program online, where it gets updated fairly regularly when it needs to be. But we will print things out for you if you need them. And I might just say a few words about why we're having such brief plenaries. We're asking the plenary speakers to keep to 20 minutes. Part of that's because we really want to cover the broad diversity of work that we think fits together into trying to make integration and implementation happen, and that meant that we could only give people tiny pieces of time. We're also accommodating the online audience, and I guess modern on-site attention spans are much shorter than when people like I went to university, where sitting still for an hour was seemed to be the done thing. Now 20 minutes seems to be about the amount of time that people will pay attention, so we've asked the plenary speakers to stay to 20 minutes. And really what we're doing is giving people an opportunity to advertise their work and to make you aware of it, and hopefully become interested enough to follow up more on what's available. You'll have seen that there's a range of digital posters. They've been online for quite a long time. They're available for commenting. We're going to have lightning talks to highlight some of them, and we've also invited people to be tour guides to a range of posters to alert you to what's in those digital posters. And there will be an evaluation post-conference. And we obviously will be interested to hear what you think of all of this. I should just say briefly that this has been motivated by my thinking about how to bring a lot of diverse groups together, and one of the things we'll be doing on the last day is launching a book that I wrote that came out earlier this year, and we'll be debating this notion of whether or not we want to have a new discipline, whether part of what we want to do is to come together. And I'll cover that a little bit more in the plenary that's coming up shortly. So I think we're just about on time, and I'll hand over to Simon, who will then introduce me, and I'll come back and give you a plenary.